The Zithrani Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and no species had ever dared to challenge their power. They were the masters of 1,000 worlds and the rulers of countless civilizations that had fallen beneath their mighty fleets. High Arbiter Calvros sat upon his throne of carved obsidian and listened as his scouts delivered their report. A new species had been detected in a distant corner of the galaxy, emerging from a small yellow star system that the Empire had always considered worthless. They call themselves humans, the scout commander said, his four eyes blinking nervously as he spoke. And they come from a world called Earth in a system they named Sol. Calvros leaned forward with mild interest. New species were discovered every few decades, and they always followed the same pattern. First came fear, then came submission, and finally came eternal servitude to the glory of the Empire. How many ships do they possess? The High Arbiter asked in his deep rumbling voice. Our sensors detected approximately 50 vessels. Grade 1. Laughter echoed through the throne room as the assembled admirals and generals found this news amusing. 50 ships was nothing compared to the tens of thousands that served the Empire. Calvros raised one clawed hand to silence his court and considered the situation carefully. Even the smallest threat needed to be crushed immediately to maintain the fear that kept the Empire strong. Send the Third Dominion Armada, he commanded. 500 of our finest warships should be more than sufficient to teach these humans their place in the galaxy. Fleet Commander Thexoran received his orders with pride and assembled his forces within 3 days. His armada was legendary throughout the Empire, having conquered over 200 worlds and never suffering a single defeat as his flagship prepared to enter hyperspace. Thexoran composed a standard ultimatum that would be sent to the human fleet. It was the same message that had brought countless species to their knees. Attention, primitive vessels. The message began. You have entered space claimed by the eternal Zithrani Galactic Empire, and you will now surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. Your ships will be seized, your world will be conquered, and your people will serve the Empire for all time. Resistance is not only futile, but will result in the immediate destruction of your civilization. You have one standard cycle to comply. The message was transmitted across all frequencies, and Thexoran settled back in his command chair to wait for the inevitable response of terror and begging that always came from newly discovered species. Meanwhile, aboard the Terran flagship Unconquered Sun, Admiral Helena Vasquez was enjoying her morning coffee when her communications officer called out with excitement in her voice. Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from an unknown alien fleet. Vasquez set down her cup and walked calmly to the main view screen where her officers had gathered. She had waited her entire career for this moment, and she intended to savor every second of it. Put it through, she ordered. Alien message played across the bridge, and every human present listened carefully to the threats and demands of the Zithrani Empire. When the transmission ended, there was a moment of complete silence. Then someone snorted, then someone else chuckled, and then the entire bridge erupted into genuine heartfelt laughter that lasted for nearly a full minute. Admiral Vasquez wiped tears from her eyes and tried to compose herself, but every time she looked at her officers, she started laughing again. Even the usually serious tactical commander was bent over his console, struggling to breathe. Oh my, Vasquez finally managed to say. That was absolutely precious. Her first officer, Commander Jackson Chen, was still grinning as he approached her chair. Shall the first compose a formal response, Admiral? Please do, Vasquez replied, but keep it short and sweet. Chen thought for a moment, and then began to dictate the message that would be sent back to the alien armada. You are adorable. The human response read, please come say that to our faces. We could use the entertainment. When Thexoran received this reply, He was certain there had been some kind of translation error. No species in the history of the Empire had ever responded to an ultimatum with mockery. They dared to laugh at us? One of his officers snarled with rage. They are clearly insane, another suggested. Perhaps their species suffers from some form of mental deficiency. Dexorn studied the human message again and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion, because he had not experienced it in over 300 years of conquest. It was doubt. He quickly pushed the feeling aside and reminded himself of the overwhelming force at his command. 500 warships crewed by the finest warriors in the galaxy would crush these foolish humans regardless of their apparent madness. Set course for the Sol System, he commanded. We will show these creatures the true meaning of fear. As the Armada jumped into hyperspace, Dexorn allowed himself to imagine the glory that awaited him. He would return to the Empire as the conqueror of yet another primitive species, and his name would be celebrated for generations. He had no way of knowing that he was leading his fleet into the greatest disaster in Zithrani history back on the unconquered sun. Admiral Vasquez called a meeting of her senior staff to discuss their strategy. The mood in the briefing room was relaxed and confident as the officers took their seats. Intelligence reports indicate approximately 500 enemy vessels, the tactical officer reported. Standard Zithrani configuration with plasma-based weapons and electromagnetic shields. Adorable, Vasquez repeated with a smile. Absolutely adorable, Commander. Chun pulled up a holographic display showing the positions of the Terran fleet. All 47 vessels are in position. And ready, Admiral. The crews are eager to finally test our capabilities against a real opponent. Vasquez nodded and looked around at the faces of her officers. These men and women represented the culmination of 3 centuries of preparation, and she was proud to serve alongside every one of them. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, humanity has waited a very long time for this moment. We have watched the Zithrani Empire enslave and destroy countless innocent species while we built our strength in secret. Now they come to our home thinking they will add Earth to their collection of conquered worlds. She stood and walked to the viewport where the stars shone bright against the darkness of space. They have no idea what they are walking into, she continued. And honestly, that makes this so much more fun. When they arrive, we will give them a welcome they will never forget. The officers cheered and raised their fists in salute. For Earth. They shouted in unison. For Earth, Vasquez agreed. And for every species that has suffered under the Empire. Their reign of terror ends here. The Terran fleet powered up their engines and moved into formation. Somewhere in hyperspace, 500 Zithrani warships raced toward them carrying crews who believed they were sailing to an easy victory. They could not have been more wrong. The Third Dominion Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol System and immediately began scanning for the human fleet. 500 warships spread out in perfect attack formation, their weapons charged and ready for battle fleet. Commander Dexorn stood at the center of his command bridge and watched the main view screen with anticipation. He expected to see primitive vessels scrambling to flee or perhaps attempting some futile defense of their homeworld. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The human ships were not running. They were approaching at incredible speed, moving directly toward the Armada with no apparent concern for the overwhelming numbers they faced. Tactical, give me a full analysis of those vessels. Dexorn ordered. His tactical officer worked frantically at his console, running scan after scan as confusion spread across his alien features. Commander, I am having difficulty obtaining accurate readings, the officer reported. The human ships appear to be constructed from materials our sensors cannot identify. That is impossible. Dexorn snapped. Our sensors can analyze any known substance in the galaxy. I understand. Commander, but these readings make no sense. The density of their hull plating exceeds anything in our database by a factor of thousands. Dexorin moved closer to the tactical station and examined the data himself. The numbers were indeed impossible. According to everything the Zithrani understood about physics and material science, what about their weapons and shields? He demanded. The tactical officer shook his head slowly. I cannot detect any shield generators on their vessels. Commander, no shields? This news should have been encouraging, but something about it felt wrong to Dexorin. Correct, and I also cannot identify their weapon systems. There are energy signatures, unlike anything in our records, but I cannot determine their function or capability. A young officer at the communications station suddenly called out, Commander, the human flagship is hailing us. Dexorin straightened his uniform and prepared himself to receive the surrender that was surely coming. Perhaps the humans had finally realized the hopelessness of their situation. On screen, he commanded Admiral. Elena Vasquez appeared before the entire Zithrani bridge crew, and she was smiling in a way that made Dexorin deeply uncomfortable. It was not the smile of someone who was afraid or desperate. Welcome to Sol, she said cheerfully. I hope your journey was pleasant. Dexorin had dealt with countless species over his long career, but he had never encountered one that greeted an invading armada with such casual warmth. Human, he replied, trying to maintain his authority. You will surrender your vessels immediately or face destruction. This is your final warning. Vasquez laughed softly and shook her head. You know, I was hoping you would say something like that. My crew has been preparing for this moment for a very long time, and I would hate to disappoint them. You are outnumbered 10-1. Dexorin pointed out. Your confidence is misplaced, is it? Vasquez tilted her head with genuine curiosity. Tell me, Commander, did your sensors have any luck analyzing our ships? The question caught Dexorin off guard, and he hesitated before responding. Your primitive technology is of no concern to us. Oh, I see. Vasquez replied. So, your tactical officers are not currently panicking because they cannot understand what our ships are made of or what our weapons can do. Dexorin glanced at his tactical station, where several officers were indeed looking extremely worried. How did this human know what was happening on his bridge? I will give you one chance to reconsider your threats. Vasquez continued, her smile fading slightly. Turn your fleet around and return to your empire. Tell them that Sol is off limits and that humanity is not to be disturbed. You dare to give orders to the Zithrani Empire? Dexorin was outraged by her audacity. I am trying to prevent unnecessary death. Vasquez said calmly, Believe it or not, Commander, I have no desire to destroy your fleet. I would much rather you simply leave. We will never retreat from primitives. Dexorin roared. Vasquez sighed and seemed genuinely disappointed by his response. I was afraid you would say that. Very well. Commander, let me show you something that might change your mind. She gestured to someone off screen, and suddenly the view screen split to show multiple angles of the space around the armada. Dexorin watched in confusion, not understanding what he was supposed to be seeing. Then he noticed that the human ships were still approaching, but they had changed formation. They were no longer clustered together, but had spread out to surround the armada completely. How did they move so fast? His navigation. Officer Gasped Dexorin checked the sensors himself and felt his confidence shatter. The human ships had crossed thousands of kilometers in mere seconds, moving at speeds that should have been physically impossible. Our fastest vessels cannot achieve even half that acceleration, his tactical officer whispered in shock. Now, then, Vasquez said, reclaiming the commander's attention, let me explain. Your situation. You are currently surrounded by 47 Terran warships. Each of those ships is capable of destroying your entire armada without assistance from the others. Lies. Dexorin shouted. You are bluffing. Am I? Vasquez seemed amused by his denial. Commander, your species has ruled this part of the galaxy for 12,000 years, and in that time you have grown complacent. You stopped innovating because you believed you had already achieved perfection. She leaned forward, and her expression grew serious. Humanity has been watching your empire for 300 years. We have studied your technology, your tactics, and your weaknesses. While you were busy conquering helpless civilizations, we were evolving. Dexoran wanted to dismiss her words as propaganda, but the evidence was right in front of him. Ships that moved faster than anything he had ever seen. Hulls made of impossible materials, and weapons of unknown capability. What do you want? He finally asked. I already told you, Vasquez replied. I want you to leave. Go home and tell your masters that Earth is protected. Tell them that humanity is not a species to be trifled with. For a long moment, Dexoran considered her offer. Every instinct he had developed over centuries of warfare was screaming at him to retreat and reassess the situation, but then he thought of the shame he would face, the mockery of his peers, the anger of the High Arbiter. The Zethrani Empire does not retreat, he declared. We will crush you and your pathetic fleet regardless of your tricks. Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was no more warmth in her expression. I gave you a chance, she said quietly. Remember that in the moments to come. I gave you a chance, and you refused. The communication ended, and Dexoran immediately began shouting orders to his fleet. All ships, attack formation. Target the human flagship and fire. At will, as 300 warships prepared to unleash their weapons. Dexoran told himself that victory was still certain. Superior numbers always won in the end. He would realize his mistake very soon. 300 Zethrani warships opened fire simultaneously, and the void of space erupted with blinding light. Plasma lances tore through the darkness like angry gods hurling thunderbolts. Each beam carrying enough destructive power to melt through a mountain. Every weapon was aimed at the human flagship, Unconquered Sun Fleet Commander. Dexoran watched the barrage with savage satisfaction. No vessel in the known galaxy could survive such concentrated firepower, and surely these arrogant humans would now pay the price. For their defiance, the plasma struck the human ship, and Dexoran leaned forward eagerly to witness its destruction. But destruction never came. The unconquered sun emerged from the inferno completely unharmed. There was not a single scorch mark on its hull, not a single system damaged, not even a flicker in its running lights. Impossible, Dexoran whispered. His tactical officer was staring at his console with an expression of pure horror. Commander, the human ship absorbed our entire barrage. Its hull temperature did not increase by even a single degree. That cannot be. Dexoran roared. Fire again. All ships, concentrate all weapons on that vessel. The Armada unleashed another devastating volley, and then another. For 5 full minutes, 300 warships poured everything they had at the unconquered sun. The human flagship simply sat there and took it on. The bridge of the unconquered sun. Admiral Vasquez watched the light show with mild amusement while her officers went about their duties with complete calm. Hull status? She asked casually. All systems nominal. Admiral, her engineering officer reported. Their weapons are not even triggering our outer warning sensors. Commander Chun chuckled and shook his head. Their plasma technology is so primitive. It is like trying to cut through steel with a wet noodle. I almost feel bad for them, Vasquez admitted. They really do believe they are the most powerful force in the galaxy. She let the Zethrani continue their futile assault for another minute before deciding it was time to end the charade. Communications. Open a channel to the enemy flagship. Dexoran was in the middle of demanding answers from his weapons officers when the human admiral appeared on his view screen once again. She looked completely relaxed, as if she had just finished a pleasant nap rather than enduring an assault that should have vaporized her ship 100 times over. "Are you quite finished?" Vasquez asked Polylithics. Oren could not find words to respond. His entire understanding of warfare had just been shattered before his eyes. "I will take your silence as a yes," Vasquez continued. "Now then, I believe it is our turn." She turned to someone off-screen and nodded. "Lieutenant Martinez, please select one of our smaller frigates and have them fire a single shot at the enemy formation. Lowest power setting, please. We want to educate, not annihilate." "Aye, Admiral." A voice responded. Thex Ron watched his tactical display as a tiny human ship, barely 1/4 the size of his smallest escort vessel, broke formation and moved toward his fleet. He almost laughed at the absurdity of one frigate against 500 warships. Then the frigate Fered, Thexeron did not see a beam or a projectile. There was only a brief shimmer in space, and then 73 of his warships simply ceased to exist. They did not explode. They did not break apart. They were simply gone, as if they had never been there at all. No debris remained. No escape pods launched. No distress signals were sent. Over 50,000 Zithrani warriors vanished in an instant. The bridge of the flagship fell absolutely silent. Soren stared at his tactical display where 73 ship icons had just winked out of existence. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. What manner of weapon was that? He breathed. His tactical officer was trembling so badly he could barely read his console. "I cannot determine the nature of the attack, Commander. There is no radiation, no energy signature, no physical evidence that anything happened at all. Our ships are simply gone." Admiral Vasquez appeared on the view screen again, and her expression was deadly serious. "That was one shot from one of our smallest ships at its lowest power setting," she explained slowly. "I wanted you to understand exactly what you are dealing with. You murdered 50,000 of my warriors." Dexorn screamed. "Correction," Vasquez replied coldly. "You murdered 50,000 of your warriors when you refused my offer to leave peacefully. I gave you every chance to avoid this, and you chose pride over the lives of your crew." She let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Now I will give you one more opportunity. Order your remaining ships to stand down immediately. Surrender your fleet, and I promise that every surviving member of your crew will be treated humanely and eventually return to your empire." Vex Oren looked around at his bridge crew and saw naked terror in their eyes. These were warriors who had never known fear, veterans of 100 conquests. And they were now trembling like frightened children. His second-in-command approached and spoke quietly. "Commander, we cannot win this battle. Our weapons are useless against them, and theirs can destroy us at will. Surely, the Empire would prefer that we preserve our remaining forces." Lexoran knew he was right, but the shame of surrender was almost more than he could bear. No Zithrani fleet had ever surrendered in the entire history of the Empire. "If we return in defeat, the High Arbiter will have us all executed," he said bitterly. The second-in-command nodded gravely. "Perhaps, but at least our deaths would serve as a warning to the Empire. If we all die here, no one will know what we faced." Admiral Vasquez seemed to sense their internal debate. "Commander, I understand your position better than you might think. I know your culture views surrender as the ultimate disgrace. But I am offering you something more valuable than your pride. I am offering you the chance to deliver critical intelligence to your empire." She paused to let her words sink in. "Your leaders need to know what happened here today. They need to understand that humanity is not an enemy they can defeat. If you refuse to surrender and force me to destroy your entire fleet, that message will never be delivered." Vexorn closed his eyes and felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He thought of his crew, his officers, the thousands of warriors on the ships that still survived. "How do I know you will keep your word?" he asked finally. You have my word as an officer of the Terran fleet, Vasquez replied. And I'm like your empire. Humanity does not make promises it cannot keep. For a long moment, Dexoran stood motionless on his bridge while his remaining 400 warships awaited his command. Then he made his decision. All ships. This is Fleet Commander Dexoran. Stand down all weapons and lower shields. We are surrendering to the human forces. The order was met with shock and disbelief across the fleet, but no one dared to disobey. One by one, the mighty warships of the Third Dominion Armada powered down their weapons and accepted defeat. Admiral Vasquez nodded with respect. You made the right choice, Commander. History will remember this day as the beginning of something new. Dexoran did not respond. He simply stood in silence and wondered what this day truly meant for his empire and for the galaxy itself. The surviving ships of the Third Dominion Armada drifted in space under the watchful eyes of the Terran fleet. Their weapons were offline, their shields were down, and their crews sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what had just happened. Fleet Commander Dexoran was escorted to the unconquered sun by a small shuttle. He had demanded to speak with Admiral Vasquez directly, and she had agreed to receive him as he walked through the corridors of the human flagship. Dexoran observed everything with intense curiosity. The ship was clean and efficient. Its crew moved with discipline and purpose, and there was an atmosphere of quiet confidence that he had never encountered in any species before. He was shown into a comfortable meeting room where Admiral Vasquez waited with Commander Chun and several other senior officers. A large window offered a view of the stars and the disabled Zithrani fleet beyond. Please sit, Commander, Vasquez said, gesturing to a chair across from her. Would you like something to drink? Dexoran declined and remained standing. Even in defeat, he refused to show weakness. I came here for answers, he said bluntly. How is this possible? How can a species we have never heard of possess weapons that make our entire fleet look like children playing with toys? Vasquez nodded and seemed to appreciate his directness. That is a fair question, and you deserve an honest answer. Please, sit, and I will tell you everything. Reluctantly, Dexoran lowered himself into the chair and waited. Humanity discovered faster-than-light travel approximately 300 years ago. Vasquez began. It was a momentous achievement for our species, and we were eager to explore the galaxy and meet other civilizations. But we were also cautious. Commander Chen added, our history is filled with examples of what happens when a more advanced civilization encounters a less developed one. It rarely ends well for the weaker party. Vasquez continued the story. So before we announced ourselves to the galaxy, we decided to watch and learn. We sent out small probes and observation ships to study the various species and empires that existed beyond our solar system. Dexoran felt a chill run down his spine. You were spying on us. We were gathering intelligence, Vasquez corrected. And what we learned about the Zithrani Empire horrified us. She activated a holographic display that showed images of devastated worlds, enslaved populations, and mass executions. We watched your empire conquer peaceful civilizations that had never threatened anyone. We saw your forces slaughter millions of innocents simply because they refused to submit. We witnessed the systematic destruction of entire cultures and the enslavement of countless species. Dexoran shifted uncomfortably. He had participated in many of those conquests himself. The Empire brings order to chaos, he said defensively. We civilize primitive species and give them purpose. You enslave them and strip their worlds of resources. Vasquez replied sharply. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Commander Chung pulled up another display showing technical specifications. When we realized what kind of galaxy we were entering, our leaders made a decision. We would not reveal ourselves until we were absolutely certain that no force in the universe could threaten us. For 300 years, humanity focused all of its considerable intellect and creativity on one goal. Vasquez explained, "We developed materials stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Weapons that operate on principles your scientists cannot even imagine, and engines that make your fastest ships look like they are standing still. But why wait so long?" Dexoran asked. "If you had this power, why not use it earlier?" Vasquez smiled, but there was no warmth in it, because we wanted to be ready for exactly this moment. We knew that eventually the Zithrani Empire would notice us and send a fleet to conquer Earth. We wanted that first encounter to send an unmistakable message. What message? That the age of empires is over. Vasquez said firmly that the strong can no longer prey upon the weak without consequence. That there is now a force in the galaxy that will stand against tyranny and oppression. Dexoran laughed bitterly. "So you plan to become the new rulers of the galaxy? Replace one empire with another?" "No." Vasquez shook her head. "We have no interest in ruling anyone. Humanity learned long ago that empires always fall and that true strength comes from cooperation rather than domination." Commander Chen stepped forward. "Our goal is simple, Commander. We want to create a galaxy where every species has the right to determine its own destiny, where no civilization has to fear being conquered simply because they are weaker than their neighbors. That is naive." Dexoran scoffed. "The strong will always dominate the weak. It is the natural order of things. Perhaps that was true before," Vasquez admitted, "but we intend to change that natural order. With our technology, we can protect any species that asks for our help. We can level the playing field so that strength of arms no longer determines who survives and who perishes." Dexoran considered her words carefully. Part of him wanted to dismiss them as foolish idealism, but he had just witnessed the terrifying reality of human power. "What will happen to the Empire?" he asked. "That depends on your leaders." Vasquez replied, "We have no desire for unnecessary conflict. If the Zithrani are willing to release the species they have enslaved and abandon their policy of conquest, we will leave them in peace. And if they refuse?" Vasquez met his eyes. "Directly, then we will do what is necessary to protect the innocent. We will not stand by and watch your empire continue to inflict suffering on the galaxy. You would wage war against us? We would free those you have imprisoned." Vasquez corrected. "We would destroy your ability to oppress others. Whether that requires war or simply the threat of war remains to be seen." Dexoran sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. The world he had known, the empire he had served his entire life, was facing an existential threat unlike anything it had ever encountered. "You cannot defeat us," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "The Empire has tens of thousands of warships, and every single one of them is as helpless against us as yours was today." Vasquez replied calmly, "Numbers mean nothing when your weapons cannot hurt us, and ours can erase your fleet in seconds." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. "Go home, Commander. Tell your High Arbiter what happened here. Tell him that humanity offers peace, but is prepared for war. The choice of which path your empire takes is not ours to make." Dexoran rose slowly and prepared to leave. At the door he paused and looked back. "Why did you spare us? You could have destroyed my entire fleet without effort." Vasquez turned to face him. "Because we are not monsters. Commander, we do not take pleasure in killing, and we do not seek destruction for its own sake. We hope that by showing mercy today, we might convince your empire that cooperation is better than conflict. And if we return with a larger fleet, then we will be waiting." Vasquez said simply, "And the result will be the same, only with far more lives lost. I sincerely hope your leaders are wise enough to understand that." Dexoran nodded slowly and left the human ship carrying a burden heavier than anything he had ever known. He had to deliver news that would shake the foundations of the Zithrani Empire. The galaxy was changing, and nothing would ever be the same. The remnants of the Third Dominion Armada limped back to the heart of the Zithrani Empire, carrying news that would change history forever. 89 battered warships out of 500 originals. Their crews traumatized, and their commander, Broken Fleet Commander Thexoran, stood before High Arbiter Calvros and delivered his report in a voice that held none of its former pride. He told of weapons that could erase ships from existence, of hulls that laughed at plasma fire, of a species that had watched the Empire for 3 centuries while preparing for this very moment. The throne room fell into chaos. Some admirals demanded immediate retaliation, calling for every warship in the Empire to be assembled for an overwhelming assault on Earth. Others screamed that Thexoran was a coward and a liar who had fabricated this story to excuse his failure, but Calvros listened carefully to every word and studied the sensor recordings that Thexoran had brought back. The evidence was undeniable and terrifying. "You are telling me that 47 ships defeated 500 of our finest warships without suffering a single casualty?" The High Arbiter asked slowly. "They did not even consider us a threat." Thexoran replied, "They were amused by us, Great One. They laughed at our ultimatum and treated our weapons as a minor inconvenience." The throne room fell silent as the full weight of this revelation settled upon the assembled leaders of the Empire. "What do they want?" Calvros finally asked. "They want us to release the species we have enslaved and abandon our policy of conquest," Thexoran answered. "They claim they have no desire for war, but they made it clear that they will use force, if necessary, to protect those we have oppressed." "Unacceptable," roared Admiral Thexoran, one of the most decorated commanders in the fleet. "We will not surrender to these mammals. I will personally lead our entire armada against them." "Then you will die," Thexoran said quietly, "and so will everyone under your command. I have seen their power, and I am telling you that we cannot win this fight." The debate raged for hours, but ultimately, Calvros decided on a middle path. The Empire would neither surrender nor attack. Instead, they would wait and observe, and look for weaknesses in the human defenses. It was a foolish decision that assumed they had time. Word of the Empire's defeat spread faster than anyone expected. The recordings of the battle somehow found their way to every enslaved world and every subjugated species, and those species began to hope. Within 3 months, revolts erupted on 17 worlds. Slaves who had served the Zithrani for generations suddenly rose up with weapons they had never possessed before, weapons that matched or exceeded anything. The Empire could feel Terran advisors appeared from nowhere, teaching the oppressed how to fight back, how to organize, how to win their freedom. They came in small groups and disappeared just as quickly, leaving behind only their gifts and their knowledge. The Empire tried to crush these rebellions, but found that their usual tactics no longer worked. Their warships arrived at rebellious worlds, only to find them protected by defensive systems of human design, shields that could stop any bombardment, weapons that could cripple any fleet. Admiral Thexoran assembled the largest armada in Imperial history, 15,000 warships, and set course for Earth. Determined to prove that numbers could overcome any technology, he never arrived. Somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars, his fleet simply vanished. No distress calls, no debris, no survivors. 15,000 ships and their crews ceased to exist in an instant. The message was clear: humanity had been merciful once and would not be so forgiving again after that. The revolt spread like wildfire. Species that had been conquered for millennia threw off their chains and declared independence. The Empire's vast territory began to fragment as world after world broke away within 18 months. The Zithrani Galactic Empire, which had stood for 12,000 years, collapsed completely. Calvros was overthrown by his own people. dragged from his throne by officers who blamed him for the catastrophe. The successor government immediately sued for peace and agreed to all of humanity's demands. The enslaved species were freed. The conquered worlds were returned to their original inhabitants. The military that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was dismantled, and through it all, humanity asked for nothing in return except a promise that no species would ever again be conquered simply because they lacked the power to defend themselves. The former subjects of the Empire formed a loose confederation of free worlds, each governing itself, but united in their gratitude to the species that had liberated them. They called this new alliance the Terran Accord. A name that honored those who had made their freedom possible. Earth became a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy, a beacon that showed what courage and patience could achieve. Species that had never dreamed of freedom now looked to the stars with wonder instead of fear. 5 years after the confrontation with the Third Dominion Armada, Admiral Helena Vasquez retired from the Terran fleet with full honors. She had been offered countless positions of power and influence, but she declined them all. Instead, she purchased a small house on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean and spent her days watching the waves and tending to her garden. It was a simple life for someone who had changed the fate of the entire galaxy. One day, a young reporter managed to track her down and begged for an interview. Vasquez agreed, if only to make him go away. They sat on her porch as the sun set over the water, and the reporter asked all the usual questions about the battle and its aftermath. Vasquez answered patiently, having told the story 1,000 times before. Finally, the reporter asked the question that everyone wanted to know. Admiral, when you faced the entire Zithrani Armada with only 47 ships, were you ever afraid? Vasquez laughed, the same genuine, heartfelt laugh that had echoed across her bridge when the Empire's ultimatum first arrived. Afraid? She repeated, shaking her head with amusement. Son, humanity spent 300 years preparing for that moment. We built weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop stars. We trained our crews until they could fight in their sleep, and we planned for every possible scenario. She took a sip of her coffee and gazed out at the sunset. When that fleet arrived, we did not feel fear. We felt relief that the waiting was finally over. The reporter scribbled notes furiously, but surely there was some doubt, some uncertainty about whether your technology would perform as expected. Vasquez smiled, and her eyes sparkled with a hint of the fire that had once commanded the most powerful warship in existence. Let me tell you something about humanity, she said. We are a stubborn species. We do not like being told what we cannot do, and we absolutely refuse to accept that any problem is unsolvable. She gestured toward the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When we realized what kind of galaxy we were entering, we did not despair. We got to work. Every scientist, every engineer, every creative mind on Earth dedicated themselves to a single goal, making sure that when the day came, we would be ready. And you were. We were more than ready, Vasquez confirmed. Honestly, by the time the Zithrani finally showed up, we were starting to get bored waiting for them. The reporter thanked her for her time and left to write his story. Vasquez remained on her porch, watching the stars and thinking about all the species that now lived in freedom. Because humanity had chosen to be patient, she had no regrets somewhere out in the galaxy. Civilizations were rebuilding, cultures were being restored, and children were being born into freedom instead of slavery. The long nightmare of the Zithrani Empire was over, and a new era of cooperation and hope had begun. Helena. Vasquez finished her coffee and smiled at the universe. Humanity had done its part, and now it was time to see what the galaxy would become.